Hi, everybody. I really enjoyed teaching you the last 4 weeks, and I hope you enjoyed last night's class. Several of you asked if I could do another video, and so what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to follow up on some of the things that we talked about in class last night, give you more of a chance to practice some of the things that we talked about layers and how to work with them a little bit more thoroughly. So anyway, here we are. I've got an image open here, and this image also, I believe you should be able to still download through um, um, Canvas. If you want to do that, you might want to also just work on one of your own images, but I'm going to use this as sort of an example of some of the things that we can do with layers and such. Anyway, so one of the things I did not talk about last night is the background layer. So when you open up an image, you've got a background layer, and it's already titled background. And if you notice, it's got a little lock symbol over here. Um, and excuse me for a second, am just going to go turn off my preferences for tools. And actually, it's probably a good time to point out to you, if you go in here in your preferences to tools, show tooltips. So it gets that little yellow box that pops up, which is kind of nice if you're trying to figure out what tools to use. And the rich tooltips gives you that short little video. Um, don't know if they'll pop up right now or not. I have to probably save, quit out of this first. Anyway, so these two things you might find, I would suggest you keep this one on, and if you want the extra help of the little video, you could try the rich tooltips. But I'm going to turn them off right now because I think they're getting in the way. So anyway, we've got the background layer, and it's already titled background. It's got that lock. So that lock tells us that we can't move that layer. We can't change the blending mode on it. Notice that opacity and blending modes is all grayed out up here. There are a couple other changes that Photoshop is not going to allow us to do to it. Now, if you take that background layer and you drag it down to the bottom here to the new layer symbol and let go, I'm clicking and dragging and then I'm letting go down there, I get a background copy. Now, if you notice, this one does not have a lock on it, which means I can move it around, can do a lot of different things with it, So that is the sort of the first go-to suggestion that Photoshop teachers have for the students is that don't do your edits on the background layer. At least copy the layer and work on that. I like to go a little bit further and simply use transparent layers to work on. The reason why is because right now with the background layer and the background copy, I basically doubled my file size. Whereas if I have a transparent layer, which I'll go over that again in a second, if I have a transparent layer, it doesn't take up nearly as much space. So anyway, let's move on here a little bit, and I want to talk about the hierarchy of the layers here. So these layers are sort of like gels. So when we gels like when they used to make cartoons with and such. So when we look through them, there are parts of them that'll be transparent and parts that are not. One, it's like we're looking down through them in a light box. Anyway, so let's say here I've got this beach scene here with this piece of driftwood, and let's say I want to create another piece of driftwood in the scene. So I'm just going to do a lasso here of this. Maybe I want to include a little bit more up in this section, so I'm going to do the plus tool. Anyway, so I'm going to take that, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it. Now it's created the duplicate layer. You all should know how to do that fine. And I'm going to go over my move tool. I'm going to move it over. But now I've decided that they look way too similar. So I think I'm going to change the shape and the size of this one so it looks a little bit different. And so what I'll do here is I'll go to Edit, and I'll go down to Transform. And here in the Transform, you know, I've got to, let me point out, I've got to have this layer selected. If I want to, this is only going to affect what layer is selected. So it's not going to affect the entire image, just that one layer. So there are a lot of different tools here: rotate, skew, distort, all sorts of things, flip horizontal, flip vertical. And I'm going to choose one. This is my favorite, free transform. And so with this, I'm going to just make this a little bit smaller. I can take it down on the top or the sides, or I can grab a corner. If I don't want to change the orientation of it, I can grab the corner, hold down the Shift key, and drag in, and it keeps the same orientation. So, and now it also allows me to move it around while I'm in that free transform. So I can move this little piece of driftwood up here. And when I've done, when I've decided that I've changed the shape and the size and everything, and I like my results, then I'll click OK. And it's going to do its transform. And there's that little piece of driftwood. I've got an additional piece of driftwood there. So one thing to point out here is that when you use this transform feature here in the edit menu, you don't want to transform down and then transform back up unless you do it as a smart layer, because this is like treating it as a regular file. If I transform it and scale it down and then say OK, and then I decide to go and scale it back up, I'm going to be adding pixels to the image, and it's not going to look as good. But you can do that if I had made this a smart object layer. Okay, just keep that in the back of your head, and you can explore the use of smart objects later on. That's a whole nother topic that might be good to talk about a little bit more in the advanced class. However, we did work on that going from Camera Raw, so you do have a little bit of idea of what the smart objects are. Anyway, I digress. Sorry. So with this layer, let's say I want to lighten up this layer. I want to lighten up this piece of driftwood and not this other one. I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and mask this, because you know I've got this cutout that looks too deliberate, too weird, of course. So this layer, just because I copy and paste, it doesn't create a mask for me automatically. It'll do that with adjustment layers, but not when I copy a layer or copy and paste something in or pull something from another image. So I want to mask this layer. I'm going to go over to Layer, down to Layer Mask, and I'm going to choose Reveal All. Now that's going to show everything just like it is. If I could also choose Hide All. That would give me a black mask. Now I'm going to choose Reveal All. This is going to be a white mask. And now I'm going to paint around the edges. Again, make sure your foreground color's the correct color. In this case, I want it to be black. And my mask is automatically highlighted. Make sure that's highlighted. And now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go around. Whoop, my brush is very hard. Also got to make sure you have a soft brush. So I'm going to go around here, click anywhere in the margins to make that box go away. And I'm going to sort of work around here, kind of blend this into the sand a little bit. Now it's not going to be perfect, but looks a lot better than it did a second ago. All right, so there. So let's say I decide I want to lighten this up, lighten this other piece of driftwood up. So I'm going to go and I'm going to go to my curves adjustments, and I'm going to lighten it, but it's lightening up the whole image. So if I want it to just affect the layer underneath it and not the layers further down, then I need to do something a little special. I need to hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and while I've got my cursor right in between the two layers there, see when I get it right in between, and it happens at every layer, right in between there, I get the little down arrow key, and I'm going to click right then, and now I'll let go of the Option key. And it's created this little down arrow right here, right next to the yin yang symbol. And what that's telling me is this curves layer is only being applied to this layer that I copy and pasted in. So I can open this, I can click on the yin yang, double click on it, and that will open up the properties panel. And I can go in here and I can make any sort of adjustments I want just to that one layer, even though it's on top of the others. That's the key here. If I want to affect the whole image, that's easy enough. I just create a layer, an adjustment layer on top of all the others. Notice whenever I'm on a layer highlighted and I go above, whenever I've got this highlighted layer, and I'll step back so you can see again. So this layer is highlighted. I'm going to go over here and click on Hue Saturation. My hue saturation goes on top of the one that I was highlighted. I'm going to go back again. I'll show you something else. So if I had it on the background copy layer and I click on my hue saturation, that's going to be on top of the background copy layer. Okay, so what's the difference here now? If I have my hue saturation layer here above the background copy, anything I make is only going to happen to the background copy and that background copy layer. It's not happening to my second piece of driftwood. If I want it to happen to the whole image and also this, then I need to make sure this hue saturation layer is on top. I can, right now, I don't have to go backwards in history and undo what I've done and create another layer. I can simply click and hold and drag the hue saturation to the top if I want to. Now it's affecting the whole image. If I have this layer highlighted, and notice we've got this clipping mask. That little down arrow button means it's a clipping mask, is what they call it. I'm not sure if that's the greatest name for it, but it has to do with something that we used to do back in the old film days. Right now it doesn't make a whole lot of, not very intuitive, but they call it a clipping mask. So this curves layer has become a clipping mask, and so what we're going to do is I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to go back up here now, and I'm going to click on black and white. And notice what happened? When I create a new layer in between the curves and that new layer, and the curves is already a clipping mask, it creates another clipping mask. So this black and white is only being applied to the new layer one that I copy pasted in. So anyway, that's a good overview, and you may need to go back and watch this part of the video again, maybe practice it a couple of times to really get a good feel for how these layers are working together. I just thought of something. I need to show you something else first. So let's say I've done this hue saturation adjustment and I decide that I I'm not that crazy about it, and I want to reduce it. Maybe let's pretend like I've done some work on the mask here, and I've done a lot of I've done a lot of painting, let's say, and in my mask, you'll see my laptop's running a little slow, so it shows up there in the mask now. So I've done a lot of painting for it, and I go, oh, those colors are just too saturated. I just really wish I didn't go that far. But I've got all this work done. I could still go into the properties here and adjust it. Or I could also go in, that was a lot. Also, I could go in here and reduce the opacity of the layer. I could take it down, and that will reduce the intensity of that adjustment. And this may be the better option if you've gone in here and you've made a lot of different corrections and all these red screens. You don't want to have to go into each one of these channels and make a correction. Then you could just reduce the opacity to the whole layer. You can do that to a regular layer too. If I decide I want to make it a ghost-like piece of driftwood, I can reduce the opacity to that layer. Anyway, so that's a pretty good overview. One other thing to point out is, let's say I'm on a layer here. You notice we have that lock symbol up here. Sometimes it might come in handy if you need to make sure you don't accidentally move something. You can lock a layer at any point. So I can click on that lock, and that locks that layer, and it's not going to go anywhere. All right. Let me move over here, and I want to go over a couple of tools that we went over last night. There are a lot of tools in Photoshop, and I'm just touching on a few of them. But I'm trying to touch on the most important ones. So we've gone over the lasso tool, marquee tool, the move tool. There's a YouTube video that in the email that I sent you, and it goes over that move tool a little bit more in depth. We've gone over the magic wand quick selection tool. I think the quick selection tool is very handy if you've got something that's easy to select out of a background. You might want to play around with that, but don't try and use that on a hard to select image. It's really designed for something where you might have used a green screen in the background or something like that. Crop tool, I've got another YouTube video that, not mine, but someone else's. It's really good. The important part to remember about the crop tool is this feature where you can uncheck delete crop pixels. That's really handy. Now, I want to talk a little bit more, and we talked about last night, we used the spot healing brush tool. This is one of your last steps in editing an image. You want to go in and you want to clean up anything you've done, and you want to go in and inspect the image and make sure you haven't had some hard edges from maybe when you accidentally used a hard brush instead of a soft brush, or you've got some aberration going on. So what I generally do before I start using this healing brush, the spot healing brush tool, I will go in here to my layers and I'll click on the top layer, make sure that's selected. It's got to be the very top one. And I'm going to go to Layer, New, and then Layer. And it's going to ask me if I want to name it or color it something. Blending mode, opacity, I'll leave that normal most of the time. Click OK. Now what it's done is created a totally transparent layer on top of everything else. And so here I'm going to do my spot healing brush edits. I can do any other kind of edits I want also with a clone tool, which I'll show you in a second. I can paint on this layer. I can do a lot of things on almost anything I want on this layer. And the advantage here is that anything I add to this transparent layer is not going to add that much file size. Whereas if I flatten the image and make a a solid image layer to work with, then that is going to take up a lot of file space. So anyway, I've got this transparent layer here, and I'm going to go in with the spot healing brush tool, and I'm going to go in. I don't know if you noticed, but there's some little footprints in the sand, which I think were mine, and I want to get rid of those. I don't know how this is going to work, but let's give it a try. Now, I've got to make sure when I use this spot healing brush tool, I've got to make sure sample all layers. That means it's going to look at all the layers underneath it. If I had this unchecked and I go in here to get rid of footprint, it's not going to do anything because it's only sampling this transparent layer here. There's nothing in it. So make sure that is selected, and I'm going to go in here and come on, laptop, you can do it. It's thinking, I think. Ah, there it goes. Okay. So it got a little funky there on the edge, but basically we're using this to try and get rid of those footprints. It might do a pretty decent job. This is a great tool to use for getting rid of blemishes, little dust spots, anything like that. What Photoshop is doing is it's looking at surrounding pixels and it's trying to replace whatever area I have clicked on with those with similar surrounding pixels. So anyway, that's the spot healing brush tool. There's also some others: healing brush tool, the patch healing tool, content aware move tool, which is kind of nice. You can select something and then move it, and it will replace where it's moved from with surrounding pixels. Paintbrush, here it is, the clone stamp tool. And what this is good for is this is good if you want to copy and paste little parts of the image and you just want to do it as a brush. So what I'm going to do here, again, just as I did with the spot healing brush tool, I want to make sure I don't have just the current layer selected, but I want to have current and below. Or you could choose all layers. But I like to stay with current and below. And I'm going to go over here and there's a little seashell there, and I'm going to get rid of it this time, not by using the healing brush tool, just for example's sake. I'm going to copy and paste from here to over there. And I'm going to go over here. I'm going to hold down the Option key, Alt key, hold down the Alt key on your PC. I'm going to click on the blue sand, and I'm going to take it over here, and notice it gives me a little preview. It's kind of showing me what it's going to look like after I click. Now I'm not holding down the Option key now. I've just got the regular mouse cursor over that, and I'm going to click on it, and it copied from this sand right over there. It just did a direct copy. And I might click a little bit around a little bit. There, that did a nice job. In fact, that might do a better job than the healing brush tool. You see, the healing brush tool left that little line there. If you see that, so I'm going to get rid of this footprint. I'm going to go over here and Option click and move it up here. Not bad. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So in this situation, I've got the Align button clicked on. And Align means everywhere I click, it will stay in alignment. So in other words, I could, and I'm not sure if you can see this on your screen with this image, but if I Option click here, and then I move it straight up, I don't know if you see that little flash. Every time I click, there's a little flash, a little crosshair shows up of where it's sampled from. Now if I move it over here, notice it's still directly under my brush. So a line, your sample point moves with your brush when you have it aligned. When I unclick it, option click over here, and you'll see it's right below my brush. But now I move it over here, the sample point still stays in the original spot. Anyway, you might find that handy. Sometimes you might need to reduce the opacity of your clone brush tool if you have to kind of feather in the edges a little bit more. Anyway, I suggest you play around with this the clone stamp tool and the spot healing brush tool are probably your best retouching tools to have. We've got the eraser tool, it's very handy. Got some other tools that we're not going to use that much. Let me talk to you a little bit now about flattening layers and when you want to do that. So let's say you've got this all done and you decide that this this second, I'm going to unlock that. So this, I'm sorry. So this second little piece of driftwood that I created, let's say I decide I want that to be out of focus. And maybe actually I might take all this whole area of the image out of focus. So if I want to do that, how do I do that when I've got the background layer here, and then I've got this other layer right here. If I want to mess with the focus, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click that top layer, and I go click on the layer at the menu bar, and I look down here, and there's one that says flatten image. That's just going to flatten the whole thing. I'm going to let it do its thing so you can see. But it's going to flatten it down. It's going to bake all my adjustments in, and I'm going to have one layer. And ultimately, you're going to need to do this anyway if you send it out as a JPEG or print it or whatever. Well, you don't have to do it if you print it from Photoshop, but if you send it to a printer, you're going to need to do this. You're going to need to flatten it like that. I'm going to go back here. Now, what I want to do this time is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to Image. Hang on a second. My battery's about ready to give out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this and I'm going to flatten the image, but I'm going to leave all my other layers intact. And if you remember, I did this in class earlier, and there, just in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to layers, and I'm going to get an merge visible. Now if I merge visible, it's just going to simply flatten everything just as if I flattened the image. It's going to look and see wherever the eyeballs are on, it's going to flatten all those. But if I go down to merge visible and I hold down the option key and click, what it's going to do is going to flatten those visible layers into one layer, but it's going to leave all my other layers intact just as they were. See? So I've got my flattened layer on top here, and I've got all these other layers that I've been working on underneath. So if I realize I've sort of messed something up and I need to go back, I still can do that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this layer, go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. You've got a lot of different blur tools here, but Gaussian Blur is the photographer's probably more favorite one. It's just a good general blur. Doesn't add direction to the blur or anything like that. And I'm going to blur this quite a bit.
And yeah, kind of like that. I'm going to say OK. And it's going to go do its thing. It's just blurring that top layer. It's not affecting the rest of the image. I'll show you that in a second. So when, see, now the image is all blurred, but I'm going to uncheck the eyeball over here, and you see everything sharp. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask for that layer. I'm going to go up here to Layer, Layer Mask, but this time, instead, like the other time I selected Reveal All, so I wanted a white mask. Now I want a black mask this time, because I'm going to work the other way. Hide All, it's going to give me a black mask. It's hidden everything. I'm going to have to make this just a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get my brush tool, make sure I'm got the foreground color to white, and I'm going to get that brush really big, and I'm going to work it up. Also remember to make sure your mask is highlighted. It should be. If you just created it, it should be highlighted. And I'm going to work in here, and it's going to blur all of that image. So now the key here is what I've done, and my laptop's going to take a second to catch up here. But what I've done is I've blurred a layer that was flattened. So I had to combine that background layer with the new image that I copied on, because I wanted to blur both areas. Do this a little bit more. And I am really taxing this laptop. It is definitely a time to get a new laptop, I think. Anyway, I won't keep you waiting here watching to see the results. Or maybe I'll talk about something else while we do. But what it's going to do is it's going to blur that right side of the image where I've been applying the brush tool to, and it will blur that second piece of driftwood in addition to blending to blurring the background. Doesn't seem to want to do anything at all right now, but you can see it's having a little bit of effect on the mask over there. Anyway, I apologize about that. If you have any questions about this part of the process, because I'm not showing you very complete results here, just try it out and play around with it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the results. Using this sort of technique to create what they call a stamped layer. When we went to the option, we went to the layer tool. Yep, everything's frozen up. We went to the layer and went down to merge visible with the option key. This is really useful if you've got an image where you want to obscure something or hide something, and rather than clone it or try and use the healing brush tool, you might just decide to blur it out. So anyway, that's all I've got right now. Sorry for the hardware issues here at the very end of my video, but I wish you all the best, and please give me a call or email me if you have any questions. I don't mind. As I mentioned, nobody ever calls me, so I certainly won't be offended if you do. In fact, I'll be delighted if you call me and ask me a question. So anyway, have a good day, and I will see you around Emory, hopefully, and good luck.